Hi everybody, I'm Dan Pilla, tax litigation consultant and author of 15 books on dealing with the Internal Revenue Service, and I'm here with yet another update on what's going on with the IRS in light of this COVID-19 crisis. The IRS last week now issued another news bulletin on how it's going to be handling taxpayers going forward. Now, this is not an extension discussion here. We talked about that in my last video. This is a discussion that focuses specifically on IRS enforcement issues. So let's start with the question of installment agreements. If you already have a tax liability that you can't pay, you still can apply to the IRS for an installment agreement. The best way to do that is to use IRS Form 9465, Request for Installment Agreement. You can also go on the IRS's website and set that up. They are still functioning in a limited way and still are managing these installment agreements. So it's important to understand that you can still get an installment agreement in these times. I also want to talk about existing installment agreements. If you already have an installment agreement with the IRS and can't make your payments, the IRS announced that it will be suspending installment payment requirements between now and July the 15th. So you can actually stop making your installment payment between now and July 15th if you can't afford to make the payment. Now, this also applies to direct debit installment agreements. If you've got money coming right out of your paycheck that the IRS is taking, you can stop that direct debit between now and July the 15th. Now, a word of caution here. I won't trust the IRS to actually automatically stop any of these direct debit agreements. I think the best approach is for you to go to your bank and deauthorize the subtraction from your bank account so that the IRS doesn't take the money, all right? Now, it's important to understand that the IRS will not terminate, they will not default any installment agreement payments that aren't made between now and July 15th. So you don't have to risk not making payments to the IRS under the installment agreement that they're going to somehow revoke your installment agreement. That's not going to happen. All right, let's talk about offers in compromise right now. If you've got an offer in compromise with the IRS and you can't make the payments under an accepted offer in compromise, the IRS will extend those payments between now and July the 15th. So they will not default an offer in compromise if you can't make the payments between now and July 15th. And that's very important to understand, because if you don't make your payments under your offer, typically speaking, the IRS pulls the plug and it's very difficult to get them reinstated. So this is important relief for folks. If you've got an offer in compromise application that's pending, it's not been accepted, but you're working with the IRS to get it accepted, and you're under deadlines for providing documentation, those deadlines have also been extended to July the 15th, all right? So you don't have to request an extension of time. They've automatically granted this extension of time. This is on offers that are currently being negotiated right now. If you are going to make a new offer in compromise application, the IRS is continuing to process those applications as best I can tell right now. So the offer in compromise is still a viable option. And as a matter of fact, friends, I would argue to you that there's probably never been a better time to get the IRS to consider an offer in compromise than what's going on out there right now. So don't be afraid to submit an offer in compromise if your facts and circumstances suggest that you should. In my book, How to Get Tax Amnesty, Chapter 12, I've got the most thorough discussion of the offer in compromise process that's ever been written to the public. So make sure if you're going through an offer or you expect that you want to submit an offer, make sure you go through that book, Chapter 12, How to Get Tax Amnesty. It's going to take you through the process. Now, if you haven't filed tax returns, friends, if you're a non-filer and you are delinquent on back tax returns, the IRS has announced that it's not going to enforce through what's called a substitute for return program, a delinquent return situation. This is a temporary reprieve as well. Between now and July the 15th, the IRS is going to hold back on enforcement action with respect to delinquent returns. But it's important to understand that while there are millions of taxpayers out there that haven't filed their tax returns up current, most of the, I shouldn't say most, but a good number of these people actually have money coming back from the IRS, all right? So if you haven't filed a tax return because you think they owe you a refund and you think, well, I got plenty of time, the fact of the matter is there's a statute of limitations on getting your refund from the IRS. If you don't file that return within 3 years of the due date, you lose that refund. Not only will they not give you the money back, but they won't credit it to another tax year either. So don't blow the refund by waiting too long to get your tax return filed. The other thing that the IRS announced is that field collection activities will be suspended for the foreseeable future. That means that the IRS is not going to be issuing any wage levies or bank levies or filing any tax liens. And again, this is not permanent by any stretch. This is a temporary reprieve, but again, it points up the necessity of dealing with your situation now if you've got a problem. We've got a break here. We've got some reprieve. The IRS is not going to be in your face. You're not going to be worried. You don't have to be worried about wage levies, bank levies, property seizures, and tax liens. So now is the best time to get this situation resolved. If you're going through an audit at this point in time, the IRS is going to expect, or we should expect, that the IRS is going to continue with the pending audits. However, they are going to be flexible with respect to time deadlines and providing additional documentation to the auditor during the audit process. All right, the appeals office, the IRS's Office of Appeals, is continuing to operate almost business as usual, except the appeals officers are working from home. In the last 3 or 4 days, I've spoken with at least a half a dozen appeals officers, and I've spoken with 2 or 3 IRS attorneys that are working with me on certain tax court cases that I've got pending. So the appeals office and the Office of IRS Counsel is continuing to operate almost business as usual. So if you've got an appeals case pending with the IRS, continue to work that through. One very important word of caution here, friends, before I leave you here today, and that is there are statutes of limitations that apply to the assessment of taxes and the collection of taxes. The IRS has just 3 years from the date a return is filed in which to assess a tax liability, and they have 10 years from the date the tax is assessed in which to collect it. These are called the assessment statute of limitations and the collection statute of limitations. The IRS is very clear in its announcement, friends, that it's not going to allow, to the extent possible, it's not going to allow these statutes of limitations to blow. So if they're on the verge of a statute expiring, they're going to be in your face for some kind of a waiver or an extension. In my book, How to Win Your Tax Audit, I discuss in great detail the assessment statute of limitations and how that works and how to evaluate whether to sign it or not. And in my book, How to Get Tax Amnesty, I talk extensively about the collection statute of limitations, how to figure that out, what waivers look like, and when the statute expires. So don't be caught short in information during this crisis time, friends. Equip yourself with the information you need to deal with the IRS and get your problem solved now. Thanks for listening, everybody, and friends, please stay safe.